all for coming out. We're going to start immediately with Shaisha Medina as our first speaker.
All right, peace everybody. Can I get some energy from Bolton? Can I get some cheers, some claps? Let's get some energy. Here we go. There we go. That's the way we gotta kind of start this out. We gotta keep the energy going. We hear Freud. So peace everybody. Just for those who aren't familiar, again, my name's Shaisha Medina. I've actually never been to Bolton before. I'm from Worcester. So little 20-minute drive out to see your beautiful space, and my family is loving it. So I just wanted to introduce this shell with stuff kind of burning in it that I know might be new to some people or kind of different. This is sage, so it's an herb that's used for protection. So we know in doing work around social justice and doing the work that Black Lives Matter does, it can sometimes be a little bit dangerous, and not everyone is in agreement on how that works. So in order to make sure that we have good energy here and that we have protection over us while we're here today, I burned sage just to make sure that we're clearing stuff out. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, word. So we're gonna let that burn on the side. So my family does all kinds of events in Worcester. There's two things that we do that I think are really important that I wanna do with us today. The first is just to acknowledge that at all points in time, wherever we are, that we're always on Indigenous land. So in Bolton, this was not always the Bolton Commons. The Nipmuc people and the Pawtucket people used to actually live in this space, and they coexisted peacefully with the earth for millennia. So it's always important that whenever we're somewhere, we're making sure that we're knowing whose space we're in, and that a lot of the spaces that we step into have a really tricky history. So it's just important to acknowledge that before we just kind of move into what we're doing today. The second thing that I wanted to do was welcome down some ancestors. So for my family and in the tradition that we follow, we know that those who pass away, who aren't physically with us anymore, are always with us in spirit in different kinds of ways. So the way that we open things up is welcoming ancestors to come down and sit and join with us. So I personally am gonna welcome my maternal grandfather, W.J. Jones. I'm gonna welcome Harriet Tubman, who I know we all learn about a lot, and she's kind of like a normal one. But for us, this is someone who could have escaped and lived her life as safely and for herself as possible, but she knew that it was bigger than her, and she chose to go back into slavery 19 times and freed hundreds of people. And the courage that that takes is something that I don't think any of us can understand right now. I also want to welcome down Ida B. Wells, who was a journalist who documented lynchings across the South, which I know is a really uncomfortable history sometimes. But if you look at the work that she does and you look at what goes on with Black Lives Matter now, particularly a piece that's called The Red Record, which if you haven't heard about it, you're probably not going to learn about it in your schools. So I encourage you to look at it. It's pretty similar to how when we do Black Lives Matters, we know the names, right? Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, you kind of read these names out. And she was doing that back in the 1800s with people who were lynched in the South. So I think those are some really important people to call down. George Jackson, who was a Black Panther. Marsha P. Johnson, who led a lot of the Black trans liberation movements in the 60s. Jean-Jacques Dessalines, that led the Haitian Revolution. Maybe you can take a moment to think of some people that you want to call down. Just think who you want to be in this space. This can be your family members, this can be someone huge in history, but it's important that we welcome them down before we get started. So the first thing that I just wanted to say, and I'll be brief, I promise. I know I already took up a little bit of time, but these are really important things to kind of open up the space and have the right energy here. But the first thing that I wanted to say is that on August 20th, 1619, the first ship of enslaved people landed in this country in Jamestown, Virginia. And yesterday was August 20th, 2020. So yesterday marked the 401st year anniversary of Black people being brought to this country in a very different way than any other people being brought to this country. So that's not necessarily something to celebrate. I don't know if we need to have a party to celebrate that, but it's something that we have to acknowledge and something we have to make sure that we commemorate, because the beginning of chattel slavery begins the dehumanization of Black people which leads to the things that we see going on in our communities now. This is why we can see a video of a man being murdered circulated on our Facebook feeds and our Twitter feeds and our Instagram feeds, and we don't really think too much of it, and we share it, not realizing that we're sharing someone who is dying. You know, you don't see that kind of thing going on with a lot of other folks, but it's something about Black folks, and it's something about our history in this country that makes that okay. So it's just something that we have to be aware of and something that we have to address. So, and I'm sure at this point, you know, there was a lot of energy going on in June. I know there was a lot of people at protests, and I'm sure your Facebook pages and your Instagram pages were all about Black Lives Matters, and maybe there was meetings that had like 50 people, and I'm sure that that energy is kind of dissipated a little bit. And I don't say that to be pessimistic, because my energy hasn't gone down, and my family continues to do the work that we do out in Worcester, in all the spaces that we can do that kind of work. But it's to say that you can't allow that to let you think that this is done. The fight for Black lives is not over. It's going to continue to be necessary. So here, I think, are a small amount of things that we can all do to kind of continue to do the work, even when it kind of sounds and feels like it's not going on. Does that sound okay with everyone to kind of go over? And then I'll turn it back to Troy. Word, y'all are dope. So the first thing I want to say is to remember the importance of voting in your local elections. The local elections are so important. And I say this, people learn and grow and move and shape as they learn new things, right? So I was someone who, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't really into the voting thing. I wasn't. I think that there's value in voting locally more than there's value in voting nationally. And I know that that might be tricky, and I know that that might be something that a lot of folks don't agree with, and that's okay as well, because we're all gonna step into this how we want to. But your school committee members, your city council members really shape what goes on in Bolton in particular, and the spaces that you live in, differently than the president is gonna be able to shape things. But I also remind you that voting reduces harm, but it's not the end all be all. Voting is not gonna stop police from killing Black people. It's a harsh reality, but it's the truth. At one point, the laws allowed it so that slavery was legal. So we can't look at the legal system to try and find justice for Black people in this country at this point in time. We know that it's a little more tricky than that. The second thing that I think we can do is to remember that we're addressing things nationally with Black Lives Matters, with police violence out on the streets. But I remind you that there's a Department of Corrections that also it does horrible violence onto bodies that are incarcerated that we don't know about. There's no cell phone in prison. People's basic human rights are being denied in the Department of Corrections, but there's not a video to circulate on your Facebook feed. And a lot of us have kind of been convinced that if you commit a crime, you're not deserving of certain things, which I know is kind of tricky, but that's not the way that we should be doing things. And if we really care about Black lives and we're really into finding a new way to police ourselves and figure out how we can get our communities back in tandem with one another, that's a really big thing that we have to address that I'm not seeing addressed in the national scheme of things, that I'd love to see all of us working together to figure out how we can make change there. I also want to say that you have to teach yourself and you have to learn on your own. So I'm someone who went to kindergarten through 12th grade. I also graduated from a very well-respected university, and a lot of the things that saved my life and a lot of the things that I know to be true and are very important and things that shape the way that I walk through the world, I did not learn in any of those institutions of higher learning. So I say this because it's crucially important for Black children, for children of color, but it's also really important for white kids to also understand the history of this country. It's not just on Black folks. There's a lot of miseducation that goes on with us, but there's a lot that goes on with a lot of white folks in this country as well. So all of us have an obligation to each other to try and learn what really went on in this country and how we can make sure that we're doing the right things to make change. I also think it's very important that we all acknowledge privilege and how we walk through the world. So for me, I'm a Black woman. So that means that I have a different I move through the world differently than someone who has a different identity vector, right? But it also means that I'm not a trans person, and I know that they walk through the world in a very, very different way than I do. So it's really important that we acknowledge the privilege that we have. So for example, again, I'm formally educated. I went to college, which means that I have privilege because this world puts value on people who have a formal education. So in some ways I have oppression, yes, but in some ways I have privilege, and it's really important that we all figure out where we have privilege and where we can kind of use some support and then enact our privilege to make sure that we're helping everyone, because we know liberation starts from the ground up. So if your work is not looking to support Black trans people, Black queer people who are at the bottom of the societal totem pole, if you will, then it's only going to make change, but not real revolutionary change, and that's what we really want. And lastly, I just encourage everyone to be incredibly skeptical of everything, especially the young people, which might be not so good for the older folks that are in the space. But you know, today I read an article that was trying to kind of sway the narrative around George Floyd, that was talking about how George Floyd was not killed by a police officer, but was actually killed by a drug overdose. So we know how the powers that be, how news, how police, how all of these institutions kind of finesse the story a little bit and start convincing people that we didn't see what we actually saw. So it's really important that you're question everything, question me. Don't take anything that I said to you today on face value. Go and learn about SAGE, learn about some of those ancestors that I pulled down on your own, and make sure that you have the information that feels good for you and that really tells the whole story. So I just leave you by saying, we've been convinced that some things that go on in our societies are normal, and they're not really normal. So we have to be really creative and really step out of ourselves to be able to reimagine the communities that we want to see, where we're protecting one another, where we're taking care of each other, we're seeing each other the way that we need to be seen, and a new future is possible. We just have to be committed and very imaginative in order to make it happen. So again, I'm incredibly grateful to be here, and I'm going to continue to burn the sage in the corner. If it gets too smoky, y'all can shout me out and I'll try and shut it down. But I thank y'all for listening, and peace.
Thank you very much, Harriet. Next, we will be listening to Representative Hogan.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Shaisha. That was really beautiful. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Can we please give her a round, please? Thank you. I'm your state representative, if you are from Bolton, and I'm very pleased to be here. Troy asked me, and I will always say yes to Troy. And I hope I have something to say. I'm going to be referring to notes because I want to make sure that I get this information to people sitting here. I'm easy to reach, and so always feel free. If you have questions or concerns, I'm happy to answer them. One of the reasons I'm here is because the best part of my job is hearing, relating, and discussing issues with young people. It's the best. It's just the best, because all of us are here on a different time frame, but we're so close in many other ways. And I look back to my youth and remember the change that was going on then, and I really see it reflected here in our culture, in our towns, and our cities, and hope that we get farther than we did before, and I am so glad and proud to be a part of it. I also believe that Massachusetts is and will continue to be a leader in establishing and applying equal justice under the law to all our citizens. And I'm proud of all of you for stepping up to say Black Lives Matters, your participation, and the ongoing discussions I've had, and I know other legislators have had, continue to be very, very, very important. Excuse me, my fall allergies are starting to kick in. I didn't know till today. But I'm also proud of the discussions I've had with our local police departments, because as part of those conversations, we were able to discuss exactly what the principles of community policing is all about, and the important pillars of that, and how most of my towns really adhere to it in a way that is important. And they've each released statements denouncing recent events, and I know that they value their work with community members. So please keep talking to them as well. Keep talking to your police departments. They're there. They're willing to listen, and they really do know and understand the work of community policing. They can always learn more, and they know that as well as any legislator knows it as well. But we must hold law enforcement, elected officials, and the judicial system accountable so that people of color are safe in a system that supports, protects, and serves everyone, because Black lives matter. Black lives matter. In July of this year, the Mass House of Representatives and the Senate passed sweeping police reform and accountability. This came on the heels of all of what went on in July with marches and speeches and demands for justice. Believe you me, it all came from the same root. It all came from the struggle. And it did not necessarily pass all by itself. It was 93 to 66, so it wasn't a huge and overwhelming passage. But you had people there that understood, and you had people there that were willing to fight to decide how and what we were going to be able to put together in a bill. It was very important. We addressed calls to counter systemic racism and force changes within law enforcement. Largely, we stayed true to the core principles of the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus and what they had put forward early in the month. They were crucial and critical to a bill being put together, to being negotiated, and to being passed. And I can't say how grateful I still am to the Black and Latino Caucus for stepping up and for leading us in the House of Representatives to a bill for everyone and for equal justice. It's so important. The key elements of the bill include establishing police standards and training, commission to devise appropriate training and certification. It establishes restrictions, so important, on the use of force, banning chokeholds, restricting the use of rubber bullets, limits the use of facial recognition technology. No-knock warrants were also very much a part of the legislation. Can only be issued by a judge, and only if the affidavit supporting the request establishes probable cause, and only if no minor child or a person over 65 is present. And it creates a commission to investigate structural racism in correctional facilities. That was just mentioned here now. So that work begins, and I hope that people pay attention, because it's going to be important. When the findings come out, we need to know what's the next step. Findings don't do anything on their own. They can sit on shelves in nice, crisp studies, and nothing ever happens. We need to keep the pressure on as we move through all of these. And it creates a number of commissions to investigate racism, as well as reform and investigating civil service. How do we get more people of color into civil service, and how do we get them on to our police forces, into our systems where the most good will be done. We also set up commissions on the status of African Americans and Latinos to ensure both groups have equitable benefits from and have access to government services in the same manner as other citizens of the Commonwealth. This is very important. And again, once these commissions are done, we need to continue to move forward, because the commissions begin the work and begin to tell us where the road should lead. And I know that there are folks in the legislature and there are activists that will help us and ensure that we will move forward on all of these fronts. You know, I just want to say it is so important right now for us to understand all of this, and also to vote. It was said here, it can't be said enough. Please continue to use your voices to call for change, and for any one of us, know that each of us can make a difference. I hope that anyone here that is 18 or over is registered to vote. I know all of us have our eye on the presidential election in November, but I'm here to tell you that voting in elections at all levels is critical, because that may be you eventually that ends up in one of those local elections, that begins to enter politics, because those are the people that will also make change. So please, 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 presidential and local, so important. For state and local governments also lead when the federal government refuses. Many landmark federal laws. You can change the world. You can make a difference You can vote on November 3rd like your life depended on it, like your fellow citizens' lives depended on it. Vote on November 3rd like Black Lives Matter. Thank you so much for being here today. Please continue on. Please continue to work. It's so important. Thank you. And thank you, Troy, for the invite.
Thank you, Representative Hogan. Next, we will be hearing from Carly Henderson.
My name is Carly Henderson, and I'm a resident here in Bolton. I'm also now a senior at Neshoba Regional High School. First of all, I want to thank Troy and the Equal Access Movement for inviting me here to share my experience with everyone. And thank you to everybody for coming out today, especially considering the current circumstances. I'm here today because we felt it's essential to provide insight on what it's like being Black while growing up in a predominantly white community. And I think the best place to start is from the beginning. I was in kindergarten when I experienced my first incident of racism. I was struck and pushed to the ground. Her reasoning to the teacher was that her skin is darker and I don't like it. Throughout my elementary school years, I was one of 4 Black students at Florence Sawyer. It became a regular occurrence for my peers and teacher to mix us up, even though we looked nothing alike. I found myself often frustrated that many people never even bothered to recognize my face. As a child, I deserved for adults I saw on a daily basis to not just see me as a skin color. Something that continued to happen until I moved to Texas in 3rd grade, where I stayed until I moved back to Bolton in 6th grade. During my time in Texas, I learned about Trayvon Martin. At age 9, I learned that my skin color automatically painted a target on my back. My return to Florence Sawyer was not an easy one. I was now the only Black student in my grade. I was always anxious and constantly had my intelligence put down. I was once told by my peer that they believed I was graded easier by teachers because I'm too sensitive to racial topics. I heard a trusted adult say that Black Lives Matter is silly, and if someone was killed by a police officer, they deserved it. How can someone say that after hearing about Breonna Taylor, age 26, who was shot 8 times and killed in her own home? She died due to the ignorance and carelessness displayed by the Louisville Metro Police Department. Her murderers, Jonathan Mattingly, Brett Hankinson, and Miles Cosgrove, still haven't been arrested. Ayanna Jones, age 7, who was shot by a police officer who fired blindly into her home. Or maybe Botham Jean, age 26, who was killed when an officer entered his apartment believing it to be hers. How can you be so uneducated while in a position to teach children? By the time I was a sophomore in high school, I had had a Confederate flag waved in my face, told that Blacks belong in the back, and again found myself frequently being called the names of other Black girls. When we left school in March of my junior year, it felt like I had to drag myself into that building every day. I felt like I had officially been defeated. I stand here today not only for myself, but for all of the young children of color also growing up in this community. I stand here today to help others understand the type of discrimination that could happen in our town. I stand here today for my grandfather, who is 96 years old. He was born in 1924, and he has yet to see the world to change. I stand here today to say that Black lives matter now, Black lives will matter tomorrow, and Black lives have always mattered. I believe that racism is an evil and infectious disease that's rotting away at America, and that rot has spread everywhere, including our town. Unless we fix the problem in our homes and hallways, there is no way we can extend that to our government and the rest of the world. An incident like George Floyd's death should never be necessary for people to wake up to the violence and injustice Black people face in America. To die at the hands of a police officer is a fear many people of color have, one that I've had since I was 9 years old. For too long, I was scared to speak up for myself and just to say racism is bad. It took years for me to understand that I shouldn't let spiteful educators and ignorant children suppress my voice. That I should be proud of my skin color and help lead the fight for justice that my ancestors still haven't completely gotten, despite everything that was built off the backs of them in this country. The George Floyd's protest will go down in history as the moment that brought a changing of the guards. We can no longer kick this ball down the road in hopes that one day we'll eventually find some cure for this rot. Racism thrives when ignorance does. Please use this as an opportunity to educate not only yourself but those around you who refuse to do so. Racism is something you learn. No one is born to hate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carly. Next, we'll be hearing from Dana Murphy from Teens for Change.
Hello everyone, my name is Denham and I'm actually from Ayr. I got asked to speak here because I started my own group called Teens for Change and ran a Black Lives Matter march in June, and we had over 500 people show up in support. To see all of you here makes me so happy that youth are still keeping the conversation going and continuing to make change in their own communities. I also want to give my mommy a huge thank you because without her, I wouldn't have been able to be here, and she supported me all the way without question, so I love you. So as a Black woman in a predominantly white town, I've become the town Google. And I know it sounds really confusing and kind of funny, but it's true. Now let me explain what it means. It means whenever a white person is confused about if they are racist or not, they will come to me and ask. It means when someone wants to know if it's okay to say the N-word, they will come to me and ask. It means when the school administrators don't know how to fix racism in their own school, they will come to me and ask. Now don't get me wrong, I love educating, but there is a time that the Black community needs to sign off and take a break. We are not your personal dictionary, Google, or Safari. The Black community has been fighting this fight for over 400 years and we are tired. We are still processing, grieving, and taking in all that is happening to us and the people that look just like us. Second thing I have realized is some people are afraid to admit that they are uneducated. Now this seems like an easy thing to admit, but it's hard for some people. Right now is the time to educate yourself about Black history, Black culture, police brutality, whitewashing, beauty standards, and many other things. It's time for school administrators to go to diversity trainings just as much as we go to science classes. It's time for school superintendents to step back and realize that they need to educate themselves before they educate their own staff. It's time for schools to start making a safer environment for minority students. It's time for my school personally to take action and step up to the plate. Admit to your wrongdoings. Admit that you are not educated yet, and admit that you have a long way to go. And lastly, but definitely not last, I want to talk to my Black brothers and sisters. Can we just take a second to realize that our skin is worth just as much as gold? And I have to flex on all of you because the thing that people have hated us for over 400 years is something that some of y'all don't have in your bank accounts. And don't ever let someone tell you that your hair is too big, or you talk too ghetto, or even speak on the type of music that you like. Because your hair is gorgeous, and people envy it and get perms to look just like you every day. Those lips that you are insecure about, half of the people making fun of you for it are getting lip injections like Kylie Jenner later. That skin I was just talking about, come on now. People sit in the sun and pay big money for our color. And to my Black little boys and girls, remember that you are more than enough. You are powerful, you are strong, you are handsome, you are mighty, you are gorgeous, and so many other things that the world will probably not tell you. And remember, it's okay to be different because that's what makes you who you are. Thank you so much for having me, and God bless.
Thank you, Denham. Next, we'll be hearing from Justin, also from Teens for Change.
Hi, I'm also a co-founder of Teens for Change along with Denham, and I want to thank Team for having me here today, so thank you. White privilege, white silence, two terms I hope everyone here is familiar with, but unfortunately there are many people, white people, that think white privilege doesn't exist, is offended by it, or simply ignores it. Many white people also believe they are not obligated to speak up about Black Lives Matter. they think being not racist is enough. So let me break it down. White privilege means that because you're white, you have the privilege of not being discriminated against because of your color. It doesn't mean you haven't had troubles you've had to endure. It just means that being white was not one of those obstacles or things that held you back. That's it. And with your white privilege also comes a responsibility to help lift the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our communities. It is not enough to simply be silently not racist. It is not enough to simply not discriminate against people because of their color. Because the hard fact is, there are still so many people out there who do. It is our responsibility as white people to speak up and be anti-racist. We do so by attending protests, calling out racist comments or actions, signing petitions, having uncomfortable conversations with family and friends, and letting your Black friends take the lead in this movement to end racism. And if you really think about it, it's sad that Black people even need white allies to show other white people to be on the right side of history. It's sad that Black Lives Matter is so controversial. Don't skew the words. We said Black Lives Matter. Period. We never said other lives didn't. We made a statement and the world exploded. But there is hope with more and more people agreeing with everyone's statement said here today. There is hope for police reform and stopping racism in schools. White people are finally starting to wake up in large numbers. Just make sure to stay woke. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. We're still here. Now, we're still here could just apply to the people that are actually still here in attendance at events like this. I've heard Black Lives Matter and our collective movement being called a hype train. People said it was gonna fall off. People are gonna hop off the bandwagon a couple months later. And while it may feel like that, or look like that on the surface, if you don't have a really big rally or protest or event, we are absolutely still here. We have made progress, and we are still going. We are not stopping, and we will not be stopped. What we are doing isn't easy. We would not be doing it if it was easy. It is hard. It is necessary. It is hard to create and have an understanding. It is hard to self-educate. It is hard to have tangible change. So let's talk about the things that are hard, why they are hard, and how potentially we could remedy them. In my opinion, it is the most fundamental and most important to first have and create an understanding. The goal for team above anything else is to create an understanding amongst as many people as possible. So often we get concerned with concerns that the opposition has, and we brand them as not worth answering to them, or that they are completely invalid. And while the opposition very often has invalid concerns, if we want to create an understanding with the opposition, then we have to acknowledge and remedy those concerns in a manner that they will understand and accept, and that isn't easy. We cannot be compromising on our ideals. We cannot be compromising on what we know to be right. We know that we are trying to spread love, empathy, and humanity. We cannot afford to try and distance ourselves from the opposition instead of sewing together unity and understanding. The goal of the opposition is to divide them from us. There cannot be them anymore. It has to be everyone. Everyone has to have this understanding. That doesn't mean everybody carries out their life the same way. That doesn't mean everybody has to have the same agenda. That means understand, feel, and accept that everybody is different, that everybody has gone through and will go through different experiences, and that everybody has different needs and wants. It's hard to create an understanding, and it's hard to create unity, because things that the opposition says are often so vile and so hateful that it makes you want to hate them back. We can't have hate in this movement, because this movement is more than a movement, it is a lifestyle. We cannot have hate in our movement or in our lifestyle, because that is what divides us. And remember, that is their goal, to divide us versus them. We cannot have hate. We have to have empathy. Part of creating an understanding is self-educating. I stress self-educating because, as Shaisha alluded to, and as many of us have gone through and understand, we often don't get the education we need in school. Many people here either go to or attended Neshoba Regional High School. Neshoba Regional High School is one of the best ranked public schools in Massachusetts and in the United States of America. Why was my education and why were the education of my peers so lacking then in the matter of Black lives? Because, like Denham came up with, which was brilliant, people like Fawny, people like Carly, people like Kendra, people like myself, we have been Googled. And it's kind of funny to say, but it's because the people that we go to school with, our peers, simply don't know. And you can't really blame them for not knowing. They are being failed in their education and are being failed in being taught to self-educate. People go to class, they hear a lesson, they toss it out as soon as they walk out the door. They don't go home to research. They don't try to have that education so that they can have that understanding. And so we need to self-educate and go out of our way to read, listen, write if you have to, communicate with those around you. And I don't mean just listen to the stuff that you want to hear. It's while it's taking time out to read a book or listen to a speech, it is, on a relative scale, easy to listen to Malcolm X or Martin Luther King and say, they have a great message and I took it all in and now I feel educated. You have to educate yourself on the opposition as well. Listen to what they say. Listen to their insecurities. Listen to their fallacies when they speak. Listen to their concerns, both valid and invalid. If we don't educate ourselves in the opposition, we will have no hope to have an understanding with the opposition, and we will have no chance at unity. probably the hardest and equally essential piece is tangible change. After the murder of George Floyd, I knew I had to start doing something. I could not sit back and do nothing anymore. I said, I have to become tangible change. I have to push for tangible change. I have to look for ways to create tangible change. And so I went to John Fani and I went to Tommy DeBono and I said, men, we have to do something. We knew then that we have our talents and our strengths. We know that we have the passion and conviction, and we knew that we could not stand idle with all of that behind us. So we recruited some of our friends. We went out and we have been trying to create tangible change. We did a public policy question that will be on the ballot on November 3rd in this local representative district. But every day, what's in the back of our minds is how do we create change in a tangible fashion? You know, having these events to create a better understanding and to communicate is great, but we do need to change the system. We do need to change the people in charge. We have to push them because we have the power. So often I fear that we are letting the politicians dictate where we are coming from. We are letting the politicians and their bipartisan agenda dictate what we say and how we fight our fight. We have to be pushing them to do what we need them to do. Tangible change is something that comes in many fashions, and you know, we talk about voting. Sayesha mentioned how, you know, the election at the top, the presidential election, we don't have tremendous control over that. We do vote, and our vote does matter, and you need to go out and support the candidate of your conscience. But we have a lot more voting power locally, in our school district, with our local reps, in our town, our school boards, city councilmen if you live in a city, mayor, congressman, senators, both state senator and U.S. senator. That's the basis for what tangible change looks like. Having the right people with the capacity and conviction to enact tangible change. That's the first step. But as Representative Hogan mentioned, the pressure from the populace is what created that tangible change within the legislature. The legislature felt that pressure. We can say whatever we want on social media, but the biggest way to create tangible change is, oddly enough, through the previous two, understanding and unity. People are always going to vote in the opposite direction of what we need if they don't understand us. The biggest obstacle to tangible change is the opposition. In a way, I'm saying the opposition needs to go away, and that isn't through crushing them into the ground. there will always be some semblance of resistance to unity and understanding if we simply try to push the opposition into the ground. So now all 6 speakers have spoken, and that concludes the sort of formal part of this event. People here are here with signs. If you'd like, we could go to 117 and chant and show our signs. I implore people to stick around and have conversations with me and the rest of the team, as we have sort of created an agenda that we will be enacting come September and October that will be related to voting. That is what we will be focused on for tangible change in the next coming months. Other than that, if people either have prior commitments or would like to go home, you're free to do that as well. Thank you.